Bonjour, hi, I'm Denis Gagné from Trisatech,
And I'm John Sverbley from Trisatech also.
and today our webinar will be on adding smarts to drug package inserts using clinical workflow and decisions. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. As per the ticker down here, the slides and recording will be made available at the end of the webinar and be available on the website over the next couple of days.
Thank you, Denny. If we could go to the first slide. This is the outline for the talk today. We'll be talking first about the traditional drug package insert and go over some of its limitations. Denny will then introduce BPMN Plus Health and the standards that are involved in workflow and decision automation. Then we'll demonstrate a package insert that incorporates both the workflow and decision automation. And at the end, we'll have time to answer any questions that might come up. Next slide, please. Okay, when we start off, let's look at the drug package insert. And next slide, please. This shows a picture at the bottom where we have a drug package, usually a paper carton, in which there's the drug being delivered as well as a piece of paper. So this piece of paper that's inserted into the package is the drug package insert. The insert has a lot of specifications for it. It's dictated by the FDA. It has a standard format and it has to be approved before the drug can be marketed. So from a drug company, it's a pretty important thing to have. It's a marvel of knowledge packing, and if properly used, the knowledge is readily accessible. Next slide, please.
So, John, is that correct that this happens pretty much everywhere around the world? Like, for example, in Canada, we have the same practice of having these packet inserts and I don't know if it's exactly the same everywhere in the world, but certainly in North America, that seems to be
I
the
think
standard.
so. Well, I guess any place that uses Western style medicine probably would have it, because drug companies wouldn't want to have different products for different markets. They just want to produce one. But I'm sure there's places that don't have it, but everything we know, I'm familiar with, has it. Now, when we look at the package insert, it follows a standard template. The first part is what's called highlights, and this acts as a executive summary about the drug where all the key information is applied. So you can go there and find out all the really key information that you need to know. Next slide, please. This is followed by the full prescribing information, where there's a table of contents that outline the main things you need to know about the drug. And so it goes through the dosing, the pharmacology, the evidence, all in a standard format. Next slide, please. When we look at the package insert, I think it's a pretty marvelous thing, but it has its shortcomings. The knowledge that's packaged is packaged very densely. It also is knowledge that is relatively passive in that it just sits on the piece of paper. It calls on the user to take action on the knowledge. If you're a novice user, it takes time to absorb the information. You sometimes have to read it several times. And for a person who's non-clinical, it's a challenge. And also, if you're unfamiliar with the drug, it's a challenge. Also, because of the limitations of space and other things, often it has to be supplemented by outside media, demonstrating such things as how to give an injection or how to reformulate the drug. And then because the knowledge has to be specified before the drug is marketed, and because the drug might be on the market for several years, there can be a lag time between when the package insert was published and knowledge about the drug that's been learned over the post-marketing surveillance. And it might take a decade or so for some things to change. Next slide, please.
So it's very representative of the technology when that was introduced as a mandatory piece of information to be added.
Yes.
Then all we had was paper. And as you mentioned, they did a great engineering job of condensing all this information into something that you can fold. Actually, they probably invented the limit of how many times you can fold the paper.
Right.
They're quite amazing how they put all that information in this
Well,
compressed document.
there's definitely a science in it. But the question then becomes is, okay, there's limits to it. How might one make it better? And so two deficiencies are having it more accessible and also adding smarts. And that's going to be the adding smarts is what the main focus will be. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and the idea of making it pervasive here is that rather than a piece of paper that most people have the tendency to just pick up and throw in the garbage right away, if there is a way to actually make it available all the time to everybody. And we've seen this movement even with the documentation of your appliance at home, you know, your fridge now. Yes, they come with the paper, but there's also a web location where you can go and access that information, whatever the model you have. So that's the idea.
And I think you bring up the excellent point that not only do you tend to throw away the insert along with the package, you also may not know where you have it. You may have stored it, but if it's in a different room or you have a lot of other ones, finding it can be a challenge. Mm-hmm. Now, this has been partially addressed in the past by the physician desk reference or the PDR, which is basically a 3-inch book that tabulates all the package inserts or most of the package inserts, at least in the United States. And this was given out to all doctors annually. And so it was something that was really quite popular. This has been around, if you looked at the dates on here, we're talking about the late 1940s, early 1950s. The rules for that specifying this package insert, I think, are from the 1960s. On the right, underneath the text, there is an example of what the mobile version is, where you can actually look up the drug, not only in a written test, but also in a mobile platform, which definitely makes it accessible to physicians. However, a patient would probably not have access or know about either, so it really doesn't help them. Mm-hmm. If we go to the next slide. And one solution to that would be to add QR codes to the packaging, to the drug container, and with printing technology the way it is, if you can put a picture on an M&M, you can surely put a QR code on a pill. So it's got a small footprint. You can look it up pretty much anywhere if you've got a smartphone. It, again, has some problems because an older person might not know how to get it. But for the younger generation, it's a pretty good way of making knowledge more accessible.
Yes, and in fact, I invite people that are on the webinar to take their cell phone, open it to the camera, and bring your cell phone close to the screen, scanning that QR code there, and you'll see this will offer through your camera the availability to go to a particular TriZetech webpage on the healthcare feature set. So these are very simple to use. They're not as common in North America. They're just starting to be common in North America. They're very common in Europe and Asia. But here in North America, this is something that we're just starting to get used to, the notion of QR codes and using them. Now we're seeing them in restaurants where they put the QR code on the table, and that's how you basically reach the menu of the restaurant. So the same can be done here for this packet insert.
Now, while the knowledge is more accessible, it pretty much is a lateral move. It just takes the same existing knowledge and allows you to find it, which doesn't really substantively correct any deficiencies in the insert. So the question is, are there ways that we can add microservices to the insert so you can make digital assistance? Can you provide web access to cutting edge evidence that is more up to date? Can you incorporate multimedia? Can you add secure communication? And more importantly, can you provide the patient both educational materials and tools to help them solve some of their own problems when dealing with the drugs? And also that they can record adverse effects, which means you probably will get more accurate information about what's going on.
So what you're saying basically is, rather than just taking the document itself and put a PDF version on the web that the QR code could take us to, is beyond that, turn the information that is in the packet into something that is more dynamic and interactive for the patient and the consumer, to go and get the information they need?
Well, I think they're regulated by the laws as to what they can do. So they probably always will have a package insert, but the use of QR codes to access additional information to correct the deficiencies would definitely be a plus. So let's, Denny, can you show us about the tools that we'll be using?
Yes, so fundamentally, to tackle the aspect of more dynamic interaction and involvement of the inserts, we're going to be using two sets of open standards. So this is based on approved open standard in the world from Standard Development Organization, in particular from the Object Management Group. We have a series of standards for creating models that will capture the knowledge, and from the HL7 International Standard Development Organization, we're going to look at FHIR, CDS Hook, and Smart on FHIR, which are standards that allow us to encode the medical knowledge and access it in an interoperable and open way. So let's set up some basic terminology. We're going to be talking about workflow automation and decision automation. And fundamentally, workflow automation is the idea of being able to orchestrate the different activities. By orchestrating, we mean going from one activity to the next based on some condition and some particular events that are happening. And by decision automation, we mean the idea that provided some input, the system can actually provide us with the best answer or the decision as it was encoded by the subject matter expert. Now, these kind of automation, workflow or decision automation, can be what we call straight-through processing. That is, that there is no human involved. The system does the decision and the orchestration. Or we can have the human in the loop, which the subject matter expert or knowledge worker can decide where to go next and to accept or refuse or reject the decisions that are made. So this kind of technology allows us a lot of flexibility on how all this automation and intelligence and knowledge is delivered here. In particular, we're going to be looking at three standards from the BPM Plus Health group, DMN for the decision and everything that has to do with visually capturing decision logic, BPMN, which is the business process model and notation, which is to help us capture visually how different activities are orchestrated, the sequence on how things should happen, and finally CMMN for the case management model and notation, where we're allowed to draw an environment, a context in which different events can happen, and then we do reactively the next action. So this is more of a event condition action. So on a particular event happening, if certain conditions are met, what action should we do? So that gives you a very brief overview of all this. Now, these languages are all graphical. So we basically draw pictures of what we want to happen. And you can see here BPMN, CMMN, and DMN, and they can all interwork with one another. I don't want to go too much into the details of this, but it's just something that you may want to look up. There's the bpmplus.org organization that support these standards and promote them in healthcare.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting is that in Visio, you can draw diagrams just like this. But once you draw the diagram here, you can publish it or release it, and you can develop an API very quickly, as Denny will demonstrate later.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So we're going beyond a drawing. Yes, we are doing the drawing of the logic, but we're also parameterizing what's happening so that the drawing is human readable, but the drawing is also machine readable, so the machine knows what to do. So here's a very brief example showing you a little bit of how this works. So a circle, this is a BPMN diagram. A circle means an event. So when this process starts, the first thing that it does is a task. And the arrows is meant to indicate what comes next. So here you can see we're calling some external service. Then what to do next? Here you see we're calling a predictive model encoded with the predictive model modeling language, a standard for predictive models. So that's what most people are calling AIs today, or the statistical AI that we're seeing today. Then the next thing here, it's calling a CQL model. CQL is another standard for clinical measure. So, and then it's going to a DMN decision, and then it gets to a branching moment. The diamond here is indicating a gateway, which is a branching moment of picking one or the other. The X means that this is exclusive, so I'll be picking one or the other. And then you can see here that when I get to this point, I have a circle, so it's yet another event type. And here I'm basically waiting for receiving a message before I carry on. So it gives you a general sense of how the diagram gives you the sequence of what should happen based on some gateway decision point. You can take different branches and you can interact with external participants through message and events. Now, let's put this in the global context of HL7 and BPM Plus. So within the healthcare world, there's a lot of work right now and a lot of tension putting on everything that has to do with interoperability of data. So generally speaking, we have data from various sources that we want to aggregate together so we can use them out of their silos. And that's what FHIR brings in. So FHIR is a standard that gives us common schema and medical resource structure. So this provides us with actual computable data that we can do data automation on. Now, beyond FHIR, we can also add CDS Hook and Smart on FHIR. And these two standards give us some metadata, that is the context of the data, and awareness of the events that are going on. So when we have data in context, we have information. So that gives us the capability of doing information automation. So we have data in a clinical context. Now, adding the BPM Plus standards to this stack, then we get task and activities, role, responsibility, decisioning, case management, event orchestration, and you can even throw a good measure of AI and machine learning in there if you want, so that we can orchestrate all this knowledge and have workflow and decision automation, which can lead us to what we call intelligent healthcare automation.
Thank you, Denny. Well, let's work on taking a package insert and taking it to one of these type of developments. The next slide, please. Okay, so the drug we're going to look at today is sotalol, and this is a beta blocker. And so this is a screenshot of the package insert, and this will be taken as the narrative. This is our source document upon which all truth will be based. Next
and
slide.
John, can you tell us a little bit what a beta blocker does? I'm a medical neophyte. What is a
well? I think let's not, because that can get quite long-winded.
Okay, but it's a drug that is used in what context mostly?
Oh, if in this case, sotalol is a drug that's used for cardiac arrhythmias.
Okay.
Very serious cardiac arrhythmias, helps control them. However, it's also a drug that has some fairly nasty side effects. So you only want to use it in someone who really will benefit from it. You just don't want to use it indiscriminately. And it's also a drug that a novice shouldn't learn on. Because you don't want to learn from your mistakes. So
therefore, the information contained in the insert is very important for such a drug.
For this drug, it is very important. Okay. But the importance of which part is important varies with each drug. This drug is not terribly expensive, nor do I believe you need pre-authorization for it. But for other drugs, those might be a more important aspect of the drug. But anyway, when you get the package insert, the first task we have is to devolve it into its elements. And the first task is to determine the terms. And so when we have terms, we want to be able to speak a common language with everyone. So by having the terms, it allows everyone to better exchange information. So here we have a couple screenshots of the data representation in a tool called Knowledge Entity Modeler. And so it has a description, it has relevant pictures, you can also add media to it. It shows its links, alternative terms, and then finally the different codes, as well as its fire. The resource type indicates the fire measure that it corresponds to. And if we go to the next slide.
So what you're saying is that by using these definitions, now it makes it more accessible to patients or other subject matter expert, that they just don't have the term on a piece of paper. There's an actual definition, some context, and some clarification and disambiguation that are added.
And that actually is further enhanced by another portion of the knowledge entity modeler, which is the draw concept maps, where the relationships between the different terms can all be described, and the type of relationship can be expressed. And if you notice, all the terms are in red with an underline. If you hit the button, it will take you to the terminology. So between the terms and the relationships, you can get a better understanding more quickly about the different things that are present. So there's concept maps for the conditions that are being treated, the type of adrenergic or pharmaceutical classes that are being done, complications, underlying conditions. So a lot of things could be represented this way. And then finally, the last part of the tool is shown in the next slide, which shows the rules that are one can derive. Because when you look at any of the tasks, you're always asking people to do something. If something is present, then do that. So for all the various aspects, such as when do you give the drug, when do you stop the drug, what are some adverse reactions, how do you administer the drug, in this case, patient counseling, they can all be expressed as the knowledge that the package insert includes that can help guide you in actually having something that's executable.
And so all this information that you're showing us there, the definition of the term, how these terms interrelate to one another, and how the rules reuse these terms in a very precise way, this is all extracted from the package insert, correct?
Yes. Okay. And it's very helpful to have this before you actually start building a model. And so this is the highest level of the model that we have created. This is in CMMN. And it's what I would call a first generation model, because all we're trying to do is port the knowledge that's in the package insert to a variety of tasks that are shown in the screen. The overall plan is broken up into 6 stages, and each of the stages cluster the knowledge into relevant groups. So you may have something that talks about the clinical evidence, description of the drug, clinical use, how to dose and administer it, adverse effects and things you need to be cautious of, and then patient education. Now, these are all tasks that are currently triggered by the user physically going and selecting the task. Items that are blue are primarily just text. They're just a paragraph or a page that describe what the drug does. This is how it currently is, but it could be enhanced by adding video, animations, whatever, to make it more lively. When we go to the second tier, we've got a task with little icons in the top left corner, and the icon indicates the type of model that is being called. The one that looks like a little hash mark is linked to a DMN model. And in that case, one that talks about indications is a decision graph or a decision table that helps you decide, is this drug number of indications for the drug to be used, say for contraindications. The green one indicates that there's text and a decision. The red one shows a chevron, and a chevron calls a BPMN model. Anything that's red is actually taking several of the other tasks on the screen and incorporates them into a single model. And the one that's shown here takes both indications, contraindications, drug interactions, and risks for torsades de pointes, which is a complication, it integrates it into one task. The yellow buttons on the screen take us to two sub-CMMN models, one going to dosing, the second going to patient education. And the reason for that is these are relatively complicated with a lot of things that would clutter up the top level model. So they just incorporate and make it easier. Anything that deals with dosing or administering the drug goes into this screen. Anything for patient education goes into another screen. So it's easier for people to understand, better packaging. So when we look at dosing, the things that are concerned about are what dose do I give? The other main concern in sotalol is the what you do with renal failure. And so both those can be incorporated. And then finally, if we go back, can we go back one slide, please? You can incorporate a lot of information for patient resources. On the left, we have educational resources. Either the ones in light blue are web addresses. The ones in purple are videos that can be added to express various things. To the right, we have text in the light blue. We have a chevron marked BPMN model, which helps a person decide, should I call the doctor or not? You have then two decision models that help make sure you always have the drug supply. This is one drug you don't want to run out of because bad things happen. And then you want something which would say, is this person at risk for non-compliance? Because again, this is not a drug you can go on and go off of. You always have to take the drug once started. So this brings us to showing more in depth what a single model might look like. And so this is the BPMN model that Denny will demonstrate to us, that documents the adverse drug effects that are seen with the drug and possible responses to those adverse events. Back to you, Denny.
Thank you, John. So we're trying to respect your time here. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to do the demo rapidly. Those of you that can stick around for questions, we'll try to stick around for a few minutes, but I'll go very briefly through everything here. So fundamentally, what I'm showing here is this BPMN model, and fundamentally the way things work is we do a patient assessment, then there's a central adverse drug effects decision that is made. Based on the decision, whether there is adverse effect or not, we'll move on to another decision, whether this needs to be reported, and if it needs to be reported, should it be reported to the FDA, COVIS, or not reported at all. So this is basically the idea of what's the logic that is going on here with the system. So now I'm going to go into this environment here. So imagine this is the EHR for the hospital or the doctor, and they have the different patient, and then they can move from one patient to the other and get information on the patient. Now, what I'm going to demo to you is what's called the CDS hook of this. So I'm going to take this endpoint of the service that I've published from this, and I'm going to add it to my EHR in there. And by doing this, you see that now on the patient, it gives me an information card regarding sotalol. So for example, for Terry Cordes, it says that there's no drug effect. So basically for Terry Cordes, what really happened is we went here, we checked for adverse effect, there was none, and it said simply continue care. Now, what I've just showed you slowly here is happening within a millisecond here. Now I'll move to Alan here, and by moving to Alan, you see that in the case of Alan, there's some adverse drug effects here. So for Alan, really what happened is that in the case of Alan, the system went through here, went there was some adverse effect, but not enough to be considered worth reporting. So we went to that path here, giving us the continued care. Now, if I move to Marquita here, you see that in this case, it's telling me in red that I should report this case to the FDA. So it gives you a global sense on how we can turn this information that's in the packet into actual running code and automation and decision. Again, here I demoed this in a way that made it automatable without me being involved. But we could also have made this in different steps. So John, do you want to take us through the conclusion of today, please?
Yes, I think we've discussed how package inserts are valuable and how they contain the various types of drug information. The regulations that encode them, however, were formulated well before the technology revolutions of the last couple decades. And with this type of therapies, any error or misunderstanding that's created is a patient safety issue because any error can harm the patient. And so we want to avoid them as much as possible. Some way the workflows and decision models can improve the package insert is by automating the reporting. It can give information to the patients, make them more empowered in taking care of themselves. And then it can provide microservices that will do things like calculate body surface area, EGFR, and whatnot, that are all useful for dosing the drug. Now, what we've shown is the first generation. When we go to the second generation, the question would be is how can we further enhance it beyond just copying the current contents? Well, that's where we can add extra services such as access to the latest evidence on an ongoing basis, so it's semi-real time, assistance for drugs that require pre-authorization, and then links to financial assistance programs where some of the tasks that are done making drugs more affordable can be automated and therefore help the patient deal with their health care. So that's basically it, Denny.
So thank you, John. So this gives us a clear idea of the art of the possible, basically, starting from that little piece of paper that is folded 40 times into this very thick folded thing to something that is pervasive and always available and can do more intelligent things for us, tell us more how to use things, and can even be integrated into EHR and system that not only inform the patient, but provide some automation for the providers as well. And also some feedback to the drug companies that are creating these particular packet inserts. So
and also, but also the package inserts are written primarily for a person who's college educated. By having access to these tools, you can also make them both culturally and academically a match to what the patient actually understands, which is a further enhancement.
Well, thank you very much, John. We apologize for being a few minutes over time here, folks. So we will gladly answer all your questions. Please send them to us via emails. If you haven't had the chance, or contact us, you have our email at the top here, and John and I will make it a pleasure to answer all your questions. Thank you very much for your attention and for your interest. We hope to see you at our next webinar.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Bye, all.
Bye-bye.